It's one thing to continue to talk about the 2020 election, as former President Trump continues to do, claiming the election was somehow stolen. And it's another to continue a futile legal fight to literally try to have the results overturned. Today, putting aside that there's no credible evidence of any kind of systemic fraud, this just has no shot of succeeding. There is no legal path to overturn anything. So I was struck by an article in the New York Times this week laying out all the legal maneuvering by a small group of diehard Trump supporters, and it left me torn. Should these silly efforts be highlighted or just ignored? I'll ask our guest George Will about that in a moment. The most notable figure involved is John Eastman, a lawyer who infamously drafted a memo ahead of January 6th, sketching out a wild six-point plan for Mike Pence to overturn the election. Eastman, according to multiple reports, is one of several Trump supporters who participated in a meeting with a top Republican legislator in Wisconsin, a meeting where they tried to pressure the lawmaker into throwing out that state's 2020 results. Despite the fact the lawmaker, widely thought to be sympathetic to Trump's cause, the Wisconsin legislator declined to act. But that hasn't deterred the push in other states to literally try to decertify the results of the 2020 election today. In Arizona, some Republican lawmakers have drafted resolutions calling the 2020 election to be certified. Other Republicans in that state have said no. In other states, lawsuits have been brought trying to get the results tossed, and one candidate currently favored to win a seat in the Michigan State House has made decertifying the 2020 election part of his platform. And therein lies the issue. This is also about 2022, 2024, potential future damage that could be done by a slate of officials who seem prepared to ignore the will of the people, whatever that may be. Now, state officials have continued to pursue this decertification effort by ordering full audits of the 2020 election results, not the state-sanctioned audits that are encouraged, but outside audits. Arizona was the first to conduct a partisan audit. That result showed Biden winning by even more votes, and others followed, including Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. There is a far-right Arizona state senator, Wendy Rogers, circulated a letter calling for a 50-state audit, followed by decertification of the election. The House of Representatives ultimately picking the, quote, rightful winner of the 2020 election. This letter was sent just 2 months ago. Rogers got 204 state legislators from 39 states to sign it. But in the big scheme of things, it's a non-starter. None of these efforts have gotten real traction based on a total lack of evidence of the outcome of 2020 was impacted by voter fraud. My question, though, is this just sort of fringe rattling that, should be ignored? Or is it something that should be covered more widely, more often by the media? I truly don't have the answer to this, but someone who I would respect his opinion immensely on this joins us now, NewsNation contributor George Will. Thank you for coming on the show. Appreciate it. All right, so now I'm asking you to be a media strategist for a moment. Should the media be focusing a lot on these efforts or just treat them as sort of, kind of fringe efforts that can largely be ignored?
This is an important question of journalistic ethics and journalistic practices. There are 331 million people in this country, and a tiny portion of them are stark raving mad. Now, lunacy can be entertaining. Lunacy can be interesting. But is lunacy news just because it is entertaining? I think not. And I think you're absolutely right to say one of the judgments you have to make in journalism is this going anywhere? Does this matter? What we're seeing on the part of this small coterie of Trump diehards is that they're ignoring the most fundamental axiom of politics, which is that elections are about the future. I can remember no candidate in American presidential history who ran by talking about the past, or as Mr. Trump seems determined to do, to run talking about himself and his grievances about the past. I think the American people say, well, that's all very well to have this complaint, but what is coming next? That's what elections are about.
But what do you make of the argument that it's important to follow what these folks are doing because it is impactful in their campaigns in 2022, potentially impactful in what could happen in 2024 as a result of these sorts of arguments? What do you make of that?
Well, I think the problem is that by covering it, you might magnify their impact beyond their numerical significance. Again, let's look at a few facts from the past about what they're talking about. In 13 federal court cases that Mr. Trump took to in challenging the election results, there were 12 Trump appointees among the judges, and all 12 Trump appointees in these cases ruled against the president. In some state court cases, in the swing states of Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, there were these 10 cases. The score at the end of the day was Trump 0 wins, Trump 10 losses. Now, these places have all been litigated before, and there is no evidence at this point that it seems to me a journalistic imperative to continue to focus on what is, as I say, entertaining, partly because their claims are so extravagantly foolish. But see, we've been down this before. People said, well, gosh, Donald Trump says Barack Obama can't be president because he was born out of the country. Well, that's a wildly interesting thing. And you say, well, where's the evidence? After a while, when there was no evidence, journalism rightly turned away from that.
Yeah. You know, I have to say, George, I was actually reluctant to do this segment for the exact reasons we're talking about, right? I wasn't sure by doing this segment in and of itself, am I doing an MSNBC, CNN typical segment about Donald Trump and this and this and that? But I thought it was really important to ask this question, and I knew that you'd be the perfect person to help us answer it. So thank you, George. Will, appreciate your time.
The question
go
is
quickly.
important.
Yeah. I think it is
important because these things become self-fulfilling problems. If you don't answer the question and you don't answer it right, you're going to become a megaphone to repeat the word lunacy.
George Will, appreciate your time. Thank you for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.